I don't eat junk food.
Hello and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animated features not made by Disney. I'm your host, Octaviano Macias, and today, I wanted to do something else, something a little more special, but things happen, so instead, I'll be doing this. I'm going to be talking about an animated feature that I've been wanting to talk about for a while, but have not really had the chance to do so. It's a pretty big one. It's one of the more popular ones. It's one that many often credit as one of the factors that led to other studios outside of Disney becoming successful in the animation field in the US. And that would be Ice Age. Now, before going into it, I just want to point out that if you followed my stuff for, years, back when I used to write blogs, I did actually write a piece on the Ice Age franchise. I didn't go back to read it for this. The only reason why I bring it up is pretty much because it was a big, what went wrong with the Ice Age franchise? And one of the few things that I do remember writing about it is that I asserted that maybe it was always bad, or at least not that good. And I just want to say that I want to retract that that theory, because, look, while I will say that the Ice Age movies did start to decline as they got more sequels, I do feel like maybe I'm getting this a bit wrong. And I'll get into it as I talk about this movie specifically. I don't know, it just feels like, okay, even if this one was not as good as some people thought it was, it still feels like it's kind of a shitty way to say, oh, the reason why this series sucks is because it was never good to begin with. There had to be some reason why it caught people's attention. Because that's the thing, is regardless of how bad a series or whatever, like a movie series, a game series or whatever, something that you don't like, maybe you have to consider that, okay, if it is popular, it's connecting with people for some reason, and it's worth exploring why that reason is, more so than just saying, well, it was just shitty and people are stupid. So, going at it from that perspective, I felt like, okay, how can I look at this and say that, especially after having rewatched this first movie in years, and I feel like when I wrote that, I only saw it in parts and didn't really sit down to watch it all. So I don't know, I just feel like that article that I wrote was maybe not fair, and maybe maybe it was, but honestly, from what I remember putting in, it isn't. Now, in terms of the sequels, I will eventually get around to doing those. I will say that I do kind of stand with, one of the things that I do remember writing was okay, the sequels, all pretty much had the same issue of okay, we're doing this end of the world scenario. It's the end of the Ice Age, because they do that for Ice Age the Meltdown. The third one with the dinosaurs, they actually don't do it, but whatever. It's still this big epic thing. The fourth one, the continents start splitting apart. The fifth one, the asteroids are coming in to destroy the Earth. So there's constant end of the world scenario that is prevalent through the sequels when you're the original movie was just a simple, okay, we gotta get this baby to its family, the end. And that was the charm to it. It is the thing that was so charming, rewatching this and seeing yeah, this is actually a fairly good movie. It is still, it still has some stuff that I'm that's not so great. But for the most part, I'm there is a lot of charm in this. And a lot of that is lost in the sequels. And part of that is because with the first movie, you get the feeling that, okay, this was a studio barely starting out, so there was a lot more freedom to what they were doing. But also, it just felt okay, it's the scrappy young studio that's trying their best to do something pleasing. Not all of it works, but it does feel like they're at least trying. Whereas when you get to the sequels, since this thing became a mega hit, they got more money to burn, and it's less about okay, we're trying to put out something special, and more about okay, we gotta put out more adventures with these characters because, families like them, and, we gotta sell it. And I mean, I can't say I totally disrespect that. I get that. If you make something that sells, by all means, sell it. But, there is a loss in quality because of that. And that kind of sucks. But yeah, that's my general thing. Again, I will get into the sequels because, granted, I haven't seen these movies in a while. But I do remember at least having some enjoyment on the second one, some enjoyment on the third one. I know that they were trash, but they did have their moments where it's okay, they're trying at least. It's a little bit of fun. By the fourth one, I just, it just drifted away. The fifth one was pretty much just there. Like, the only thing that really saves the sequels, consistently is Scrat himself, the little, squirrel, prehistoric squirrel that eats, well, not really eats. He did eventually eat it because, I'm recording this right after, Blue Sky finally released, like, the final thing that they did, which is a bit where Scrat finally gets that nut. But, yeah, which, cute, and it honestly sucks that they had to go the way they did just because Disney bought them off, but, hey, whatever, it happens. But yeah, that's the one thing that was consistent throughout the sequels, is that Scrat was always funny, so at the very least on that front, I'm like, okay, I get why some people might pay to watch these movies, because it's like, look, even if it's just a 10-minute Scrat, short against the, 90-minute movie, at the very least, that's a very funny short. MVP of the Ice Age franchise. But going back to Ice Age 1, what exactly made the first Ice Age so special? And I like to think of it as it being what was said to one of the writers, because like one of the writers who ended up writing the sequels as well, so I don't know, I guess, definitely it was a whole money thing, but one of the writers was like, look, I can't write for this, I don't write for kids movies, and basically Fox was just like, well, then don't write for a kids movie, write a good movie. And you can see that, because even though this is definitely a family movie, it's something that you can take your kids to watch. It's the kind of thing where it's like the characters are all talking and acting in ways that you would find like in an adult movie, or what some people would consider adult movies. Because that's the thing, it's like a lot of people are weird about what's considered to be an adult movie. I mean, of course, they're the ones that are mainly for adults, but in terms of, you'll have movies that are like, I know this, I love the Avengers, for example. I love the Avengers movies. I love the Fast and Furious movies. But those, at their heart, would be considered kids movies if they were animated. But because they're live action, with, all the action and the comedy and all that stuff, it gets turned into a movie that's okay for adults to watch. And that's kind of where this one is at. Like, if you were to make it live action with actual people, and they kind of did, because realistically, this is just a remake. Not a one-to-one, but it is essentially a remake of Three Men and a Baby. There's literally 3 men and a baby, only they're animals now. And most people would be like, oh yeah, that's, a movie that, grown-ups can watch. Even though kids can watch it too. And that's the thing, is you got a lot of movies that, would be considered grown-up movies that kids can watch. I mean, for example, I saw Citizen Kane, one of the greatest, if not the greatest movie, according to some people, of all time. As a kid, I was like 9 or 10 years old when I seeked that out, because I was a big fan of cinema. And yeah, people, wouldn't say like, oh, that's a movie for kids, even though there's nothing really wrong for it for a kid to watch. I mean, there's certain things that, kids won't fully get. That's true. But that's true of anything. And that's kind of how this movie plays out, is that, with a lot of the dialogue and the way the characters act, it's like, yeah, as a kid, you see goofy animals saying goofy shit, but as an adult, you actually find a lot of charm in the way they talk to each other, because it's done in a way where it doesn't feel like it's dumbing itself down. Like, of course, none of the characters are saying anything that's really inappropriate, but you're like, okay, I see what you're saying now. Like, with Sid, acting kind of horny early on, like, like he, tries to hook up with some chicks with the baby, and then, yeah, Manny basically trying to tell him, like, hey, look, if you find a girl, you hold on to her and be, you be dear to her. Don't just, swing around with any lady. And it's like, okay, yeah, as a kid, that some of that stuff does register, but for the most part, once you're an adult, that's when you fully start realizing, oh, okay, that's what they're saying. And yeah, that's generally it. It's just that it is, filled with good writing. Like, even though this movie, of course, has the scrap bits, and they're actually more toned down than the sequels do, because outside of the opening and the ending, most of the scrap bits are just quick, like 10-second non sequiturs. Like, they're literally like, okay, end of scene. Here's the little, Scrat, and he's doing something stupid, or occasionally he encounters the main characters, and it's just for a quick gag. But realistically, it's not like the sequels where there's like almost a whole short story around his character going throughout, because it's just the opening. And I know partially because he was added in more throughout the movie because of test screenings where people really liked the intro with him, so they're like, okay, we gotta put him in more of the movie. But yeah, it's the Scrat stuff is funny, but it doesn't it's not saving the movie like it does for the sequels, because you do find a lot of charm in these characters and how they bond with each other. You have Manny, the mammoth, who's voiced by Ray Romano, great in it. John Leguizamo as Sid, again, great, and I can totally understand why he would want to do more of these, just because it is a fun character, and, you know, the voice that he creates out of it is fun. Diego, voiced by Dennis Leary, who's probably the one that, yeah, maybe, you know, as much as, you know, like, I got nothing against Dennis Leary in this, but maybe it was right for the people behind us to kill his character off, because originally, and the movie kind of makes more sense once you see it from that perspective, originally his character was not supposed to live at the end. He was supposed to sacrifice himself, and that would be it, but Dennis Leary convinced the people that, like, hey, no, he should live, you know, kids would be sad if he died, which I get his standpoint. I'm not saying that I don't get his standpoint on that. It's just that once you get to the sequels, it kind of feels like, okay, he has less and less to do compared to the other characters, at least from what I remember, because, yeah, like the second movie, it's like, okay, so with that, it's like, oh, he has a fear of water, and that's kind of what his arc is. The third one is like, oh, he doesn't feel like he's a predator anymore, which, I mean, you know, that's actually not a bad arc to have, but it feels kind of like a repeat of what happened in 2, only this time, instead of being scared of water, he's scared of, you know, losing his touch. By the fourth one, he hooks up with a girl, and then by the fifth one, it's like, I don't even remember what Diego adds to the fifth one, and again, it's not even that I'm trying to trash the character or the actor. I mean, I do get, you know, again, Dennis Leary's standpoint on that regarding the first movie, but I don't know, I just feel like in the sequels, he starts to add less and less, that it becomes like, okay, maybe it would have worked out better if he hadn't survived, but, you know, it is what it is, and it's not like it's a terrible character, it's just, and for the most part, in this first movie, even though it's pretty noticeable, like, okay, yeah, he wasn't supposed to survive because he kind of disappears for the last few minutes and then reappears, but it makes for a cute ending anyway, so I wouldn't complain too much about it. It's just something that I would say, like, maybe it would have, but yeah, it's like, it is a really good cast that you got in here. I know there's like the villain group that Diego is a part of, the Saber-Tooth Tigers, who are led by, you know, like a vicious leader. They're serviceable. They're not great characters, but they're not anything that, you know, hurts the movie in any specific way. One of the things that I did find weird watching it this time around was realizing, like, wait a second, one of the villain sidekicks, the crazy one, is Jack Black, and I had to look it up because I was like, okay, that voice sounds familiar. It sounds like Jack Black, but it could be just a voice actor doing the Jack Black impression, because I've heard a few that have done it pretty well. And then I look it up and I find out, like, oh no, it's actually Jack Black. He did a voice in this, and I'm like, huh, that's weird. You would think that he would, one, play a bigger character, and two, he would be mentioned more for the cast, but no, I mean, I guess this is before he really took off in the mainstream, but it's still just weird looking at it from that perspective. Still, you know, it's a good voice performance, and realistically, the voice performances in this are really solid. Again, as I've said earlier, the whole movie is pretty much just a very simple, okay, we find a baby, we gotta go take it back home to its parents, and part of that simplicity is that a lot of the movie feels like little vignettes. Like, up until you get to the baby, you get little stories like, okay, here's Sid, taunting some, you know, prehistoric rhino creatures. Here's Manny defending him. Here's them hanging out, and it gives you a lot of their character, just right there, without actively telling you what exactly it is. Because that's another thing that I found charming about this movie, watching it again, is that a lot of the character work is done just by the characters acting, without them actually telling you what exactly their deal is. Like, especially with Manny, which is one of the things that is definitely ruined in the sequels. Manny pretty much is like, okay, you know, he's alone. He doesn't want to be, he doesn't want to be around people. Other animals acknowledge, like, hey, that's weird for a mammoth. And you never really get a full idea of, like, okay, what exactly why is he alone? And as the story goes along, you start to get an idea, like, okay, him talking about how, you know, men should be loyal to their girls, protecting, you know, like the herd and whatnot. You start to get an idea, like, okay, so he's clearly, he did have an experience with a herd, and you get this whole beautiful sequence with cave paintings where he basically remembers what essentially was his family and seeing them get killed by people. So it's like, okay, that's great, and of course, it adds a layer to his character because early on he even mentions, like, look, I can, I understand that creatures gotta eat for the food chain and whatnot, but if you're just killing for pleasure, that's where my issue lies. So that kind of feels like it's built upon the whole human thing, because of course he's trying to take this baby back to the humans, and it's not like he's even fully against it. Like, of course at first he's hesitant to do it, but as it goes along, he does, like, okay, he's gonna do this regardless of whether or not if there's a danger to him. So that's kind of neat. Which, of course, the whole baby thing ties into Diego's story as well, where Diego has to get it for his leader, because the leader pretty much is like, okay, well, these humans killed one of our own, so we gotta do an eye for an eye, and, let's get his baby and kill it just to, get some proper revenge. Of course, Diego eventually betrays his group because he starts to bond with Manny and Sid. And this is one area where I think it is kind of messy, in that in terms of him bonding with the two characters, that's actually fairly well done in the movie. What isn't as well done is that you don't see enough reason in terms of him hating his group, and realistically you don't need it too much, but I don't know, I feel like a better story would have at least acknowledged, like, okay, while he was working for the villain, maybe the villain was more abusive, or maybe fully established that Diego is pretty much already on his last legs with the group, like, maybe he's, they're ready to get rid of him, so that would kind of give like a more motivation for him to eventually leave, because as it is in the story, it's just like, okay, so he's given this task, he kind of messes it up, but tries to redeem himself, and then he decides, he has a change of heart, which, again, it's fine in the way it's done, because you at least do see him bonding with the main characters, but you do get a sense of, like, maybe in a better story, you would have gotten more of an idea of, like, yeah, this group was bad, really bad for him, and while it's not entirely necessary, it certainly helps in creating this arc for him as to why he would eventually do what he does. I think, anyways. I don't know. It does work for what it is. I just feel like it could have been done a little better. And while we're talking about the characters, what's just to get back to him, like, I think it's a really great performance. John Leguizamo definitely sells it. From what I read, it seems to be that was probably the hardest character that they had to nail down, because originally they wanted him to be more of a con artist, and you can actually see deleted scenes of this, like if you have the DVD, where he's more of an asshole character, so he wasn't as likable. And that didn't really register to me as a kid, but watching it as an adult is like, okay, yeah, I could see hints of that in the movie, because you do get the whole bit with him trying to hook up with two ladies and whatnot, but it is trimmed down enough where it's just gone, because there's even a whole subplot that was trimmed out where there was like a love interest character that he didn't really like, but she liked him, and she was constantly following him around, and yeah, I definitely get why that was cut. It just doesn't add anything to what relatively is a charming story, and that's definitely an area where I'm like, yeah, they definitely made the right call here, because John Leguizamo, does sell the voice well, and he definitely would have made it well with the schemy, kind of character, but you could tell that it probably wouldn't have been as likable. But yeah, it's just a really funny movie. There's a lot of great gags. There's a whole bit with dodos that is definitely funny as a kid, because it's got all the hijinks, but it's even funnier as an adult when you realize, like, okay, yeah, these things went extinct. You realize that, okay, everyone sees them as crackpots, because they're acknowledged, like, okay, yeah, the ice is not going anywhere, and just, like, all the little things that they do to screw up, like, they're pretty much dead the second one of the characters mentions, like, oh yeah, there goes the last female, so it's like, oh, they're gone. And, think about the eyes. That's the interesting thing about this movie, is that outside of the Scrat intro, which apparently, one of the major reasons why they added that in was because when you watch the movie, it takes a good chunk, like almost half an hour or so, for them to actually start reaching icy locations, because at the start of the movie, it does mention, like, okay, we're migrating to where it's warmer, because right now it's starting to get cold, so this is not going to be good, for us. So you do get a whole thing where it's like, okay, here's some land, and then it slowly starts adding more and more snow, which I thought was kind of neat, and I didn't really pick up as much as a kid, just because, you're mostly focused on, the animals and whatnot, so you don't realize that that the snow is building and building to the point that it's a complete iceland by the end of the movie. But yeah, that's kind of neat. And in terms of the animation, it's definitely something where it's like, yeah, you could tell this was made by a scrappy, fresh studio. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, it doesn't hold up that too well. Like, in terms of other CG stuff from around that same period, I would definitely say this is one that looks more outdated. And of course, it doesn't really hold up compared to a lot of other stuff now. But for the most part, there is some things that are still kind of neat to look at. One of the things I will say with Blue Sky, and I don't know if a lot of other people share this sentiment, but I feel like Blue Sky was really great at animating animals. And not that other studios aren't, but I don't know, I always got this feeling like with Blue Sky that they really did study in on how animals move. Because you'd notice that a lot of animals, like, move in a way where it's like, yeah, that feels like the actual animal. Like, when you see Manny walking, it feels like an actual elephant. The way, like, the saber-toothed tigers walk, feels kind of cat-like, even if it's a little janky at times. Even Seth has a nice little move to him that I know is definitely not sloth-like, but it's, a fun cartoon look for it. I don't know, that's the one thing that I feel like Blue Sky definitely excelled at, because I know, and especially is noticeable with like the Rio movies where the birds really do feel like they're, birds, more so than a lot of other studios that do birds like in their animation. Like it does feel like, yeah, the way the bone structure moves, the way like the fur or the feathers or whatever, move on the characters, like it feels the way it should for these creatures. So that's one thing I do think still holds up pretty well on this. Like, even though there's some jankiness with some of the animals and some of the characters, it's definitely there. And I like how this movie does, more so than the sequels, try to incorporate some silent moments into the story, so it just lets the animation speak for itself, especially with the humans. They could have had the humans talking like the animals, but instead they made the choice of keeping them silent. So you got, even though it's brief moments with the humans, it's all nice little moments where they're like, looking around, and you kind of get an idea of what they're saying just by their emotions, even though, the humans are definitely not well animated in this. But, the fact that you can tell what, like, say, the baby's father is thinking when he's looking around and whatnot, I think that's kind of neat. It is something that's pretty successful about this. So, yeah, Ice Age, funny movie. It's got a great cast. It is well written. The animation isn't perfect, but for what it's worth, it does hold up pretty well. I don't know, I just dug it a lot more than I remember when I saw it as a kid, seeing it years ago, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I can see why this was a special thing. And I could actually see how sequels could have worked for this. It's just that they ended up constantly doing this end of the world scenario and focusing on adding a bunch of characters, adding love interest to those characters, and it's just like, I don't know, you lost the charm of how this movie was allowed to be quiet at sometimes. It was allowed to be adults just talking like adults, even if they weren't, saying swears or saying things that were inappropriate in front of kids. They are talking like adults. You lost a lot of the subtlety from the characters in terms of how their arc progresses. The only thing that you really kept and further enhanced was just Scrat itself, which great Scrat is a funny character, but it would have been nice if they could have kept these characters as being, as well done as they were here. So, I don't know. I'll do the sequels someday. I'm not going to do it right away, but I do hope that there is more charm than I'm giving it credit for. I'm hoping that 2 and 3 hold up in some way for me. 4 and 5, the last times I saw it, I didn't really like it, but maybe I find something new. But at the very least, for this first one, undeniable, great movie. I can understand why this and Shrek are often credited as the movies that, prove that other studios could succeed outside of Disney. It was pretty much like a 1-2 punch. And yeah, obviously, most people have watched it, but if you haven't, watch it. If you've watched it, but it's been years, watch it again. It's a fun movie. Yeah, it's just a really solid movie. So I just want to say thank you for listening. This has been October Macias. I hope you see me again next time.
Whoa! Woo! Yeah! Who's up for round 2?
Thank you for coming on and listening to me today. If you enjoyed it, you can always subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can follow my podcast. It's on Podbean, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. And if you want to support me even more, there's always the option of Patreon. Patreon is a great way to support artists, and With that, you can always put in $1 or even more. It's all up to you, all just to help produce the show and other things I may do. Thank you again, and I hope to see you in the coming future.